Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Beis, and we will be learning today, Mitzvah Hashem, Daf Yud Aleph Amid Beis. We're going to be beginning Siman Kuf Lamed Aleph, Dinei Nefilas Apayim, the halachos that govern Tachanun. Nefilas Apayim literally means the falling on the face, because we know that when we recite Tachanun, we put our head down and we cover our faces. So, Dinei Nefilas Apayim, the halachos of Tachanun, Ubay Ches Seifim, and here we have 8 Seifim. Now, in a little bit of a departure from the norm, although I have done this on previous occasions, I'm going to read to you first a paragraph from the Aruch HaShulchan, where I think the Aruch HaShulchan gives us a very nice hakdama, a very nice little preface to the halachos of Tachanun that we don't really get from the Mechaber or from the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Aruch HaShulchan in his Sif Aleph, after the Chazan finishes Chazaras Hashatz, Neuflim al Pneihem, everybody falls down on their faces, Umischanenim, and they say Techinois. They're mispalel. Now, very interestingly, the Techinois that are said, what exactly should be said by Tachanun, is not really discussed over here. It's touched upon, but really it's only touched upon what we should say after Tachanun. But not the Mechaber, neither the Mechaber nor the Mishnah Berurah really discuss what it is that we're saying during Tachanun proper. But we see here in the Aruch HaShulchan, he just says, Neuflan al paneim umischanenim. You fall down and you're mispalel. Ve'inyan nefilas apayim hu, what exactly is the inyan of Tachanun? What's at play here? What lies behind Tachanun? Says the Aruch HaShulchan, Kedei sheyisader hatfila begimel sidarim. The purpose of nefilas apayim is that we want to be mispalel to the Rebbeinu Shalom in 3 different formats. Tchila, first, tefillah de miyushav. First, we have a tefillah de miyushav. We have a tefillah, a davening, that we do largely sitting down. V'hainu ad Shemoneh Esrei. That's up until Shemoneh Esrei. We're not required to stand by the vast majority of the davening up until Shemoneh Esrei. Psuke de Zimra, you're allowed to sit down by Psuke de Zimra. We stand by Bar Sha'amai, we stand by Yishta, but you're allowed to sit during Psuke de Zimra. You're definitely allowed to sit by Berches Kriya Shema and by Kriya Shema. So up until Shemoneh Esrei is what the Aruch HaShulchan refers to here as Tefillah de Miyushav. So that's one format. That's davening while we're sitting. V'achakach Tefillah de Me'umid. Then we have the part of davening that we do while we're standing. Tefillah de Me'umid. What's the Tefillah de Me'umid? Says that's Shemoneh Esrei. Right? Shemoneh Esrei, we need to stand. So that's the second format. The second format is davening is while we're standing. V'achakach nefilas apayim. And then finally we have the final format of davening, and that's nefilas apayim, where we put our heads down and cover our faces. Now, why do we need to have these 3 different formats of davening? Says the Aruch HaShulchan, and we're going to see this in the Mishnah Berurah as well. This is because we want to do what Moshe Rabbeinu did. Diksiv, because the pasuk tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu told Klal Yisrael. When Moshe Rabbeinu told Klal Yisrael how he was mispalel to the Rebbeinu Shalom on our behalf, he says, Va'eshev bahar. First he says that I sat on Har Sinai. Va'eshev bahar. Uksiv. And then it says later, Va'anoichi amaditi bahar. And then it says, I stood on Har Sinai. And then finally it says, Va'esnapel lifnei Hashem. And I fell down in tefillah before Hashem. So we see that Moshe Rabbeinu used all 3 formats. He davened to the Rebbeinu Shalom sitting, he davened to the Rebbeinu Shalom standing, and lastly, he davened to the Rebbeinu Shalom with his head down, v'esnapal, which we're going to see, it doesn't only mean his head down, he was bowed down. Ulachein, and therefore, because we are emulating Moshe Rabbeinu, And we are davening in all three of these formats. Ulechein, therefore, oimrim achar kach, that's why after Tachanun we say, Va'anachnu lo neda ma naseh. We don't know what else to do. Keloimar, that is to say, hispalalnu b'chol oifen hayecholos. We have davened every way that we know how. V'yoser mizeh lo neda ma naseh. And now we don't know what else to do. And therefore, v'rak alecha einenu. And now our eyes are to you, Rabbeinu Shalom, and we are begging for your help. So here we have a little bit of a hakdama, so to speak, into what Nefilas Apayim is all about. Nefilas Apayim is part of our davening because we've said Psukei Zimra, we've said Brechas Kriya Shema, when we mekabel all Malchus Shamayim in Kriya Shema, we davened to the Rabbeinu Shalom in Shemoneh Esrei, we had a Tefillah D'Miyushiv, we had a Tefillah D'Me'umid, we're still beseeching the Rabbeinu Shalom. Now we come on the heels of Shemoneh Esrei, we come with the Nefilas Apayim, we put our heads down, and in the earlier days, they didn't only put their heads down. In the earlier days, they bowed down, bepishut yodayim v'raglayim, even more than what we do on Yom Kippur, by the Avodah and by Aleinu, where we bow down. That's the way they used to say the Nefilas Apayim. We don't do that. We're going to see why. We only put our heads down and cover our faces. That is a continuation of our tefillah. Now, based on that, now let's take a look here at the Mechaber. Says the Mechaber Sif Aleph. And he brings this down from the Talmidei HaRashba. Ein ledaber bein tefillah lenefilas hapayim. We are not supposed to speak between tefillah, between Shemoneh Esrei and nefilas hapayim. Let's break here right away. Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. Ein ledaber, not supposed to speak between Shemoneh Esrei and Tachanun. Why not? Dal yedei zeh ein tchinasai shemischanein benefilas hapayim miskabelas kol kach. Because if you interrupt between Shemoneh Esrei and Tachanun, then, says the Chavetz Chaim, Tachanun is not very efficacious. It takes away from the effectiveness of Tachanun. But now the Mishnah Berurah comes and he tempers a little bit what the Mechaber said. The Mechaber said, Ein ledaber, which means you can't speak. Sounds like the Mechaber is telling us a halacha that you're not allowed to be mafsik. There's a halacha of being mafsik between Shemoneh Esrei and Tachanun that you're not allowed to be mafsik. That's what it sounds like. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no. V'davka kishem mafsik v'oisek b'dvarim acherim legamri. What it means is not simply speaking. It means if you're mesiach das. It means if you're mesiach das from tefillah, you've gotten out, you've been distracted from tefillah. You're no longer davening. Now you got involved in something else. Kishem mafsik v'oisek b'dvarim acherim legamri. Avol sicha ba'alma leslan ba. But if you just simply spoke, that doesn't cause a hefsek between tefillah, between Shemoneh Esrei and Tachanun. Continues the Chavetz Chaim. V'davke shaloi be'eis sheshliach tzibur chayzer hatefillah. Of course, says the Chavetz Chaim, when I'm telling you that being mafsik between Shemoneh Esrei and Tachanun with speech, with sicha ba'alma, is not geferlich, of course, that's only if it's not in the middle of Chazar Sashatz. Does tzarich lishtoik ulahazin heitev kol bracha ubracha. Because if it's during Chazar Sashatz, you're not allowed to speak. If it's sicha ba'alma, you're not allowed to speak. In the middle of Chazar Sashatz, you have to be quiet. Does tzarich lishtoik ulahazin heitev, and you have to listen well. Kol bracha ubracha, every bracha that the Chazan says in Chazar Sashatz, Kidela El B'Sim Kov Chav Daled Siv Daled, like we learned previously in Hilchas Tefillah Kov Chav Daled Siv Daled. The Kolshkein de Ledvar Kedusha Kigoin Masha Mafsike B'Tchinois, certainly. So what is the Mishnah Berurah saying here? First, the Mishnah Berurah said, the Mechaber said that you're not allowed to speak between Shemoneh Esrei and Tachanun. The Chavetz Chaim came and he tempered what the Mechaber said. He said, you're not allowed to speak. Doesn't really mean you're not allowed to speak. What it means is you're not allowed to be mesiach das. You're not allowed to get involved in something else. You can't become distracted from tefillah. Why? Because like we saw in the Aruch HaShulchan's Hakdama to Tachanun. What is Tachanun? Tachanun is a continuation of tefillah. So if you got involved, in the words of the Mishnah Berurah, if you are mafsik v'oisik b'dvarim acherim legamri, you got involved in something else. You walked out of shul and you got involved you got on the phone and you're talking to your workers, you're talking to your business partner. So now you're Mesiach Das from tefillah. Now davening is over for you. Now you want to go continue davening with nefilas hapayim? That doesn't work. But this that the Mechaber said, ein ledaber, the Chavetz Chaim's tempering that. Sicha ba'alma, if you just spoke a few words between Shemoneh Esrei and nefilas hapayim, that's okay. Then the Chavetz Chaim said, but just be careful. When I said that speaking is okay, chas v'chalila, you're not allowed to speak in the middle of chazaras hashatz. Now, says the Mishnah Berurah, v'chol shkein, kal v'chomer, if I'm telling you that really you are allowed to be mafsik between Shemoneh Esrei and Tachanun with sicha ba'alma, kol shkein, certainly, the ledvar kedusha, for a davar shebekdusha, kigoyin masha mafsikin betchinois, kigoyin v'hurachum, right? We find that we are mafsik between Shemoneh Esrei and Tachanun. For example, right? Even Nusach Sfard. Nusach Sfard, we don't finish Shemoneh Esrei and then go straight to Nefilas Hapayim. Nusach Sfard says Vidoi, they say Shloish Esrei Midois, then they go to Vayomer David al Gad, Rachav v'Chanun, then they go to Nefilas Hapayim. Nusach Ashkenaz, so on a regular day without Kriyas HaTorah, yes, they go straight from Chazaras HaShatz to Nefilas Hapayim. But on Sheni v'Chamishi, on Monday and Thursday, they're mafsik with V'hurachum between Shemoneh Esrei and Nefilas Hapayim. So says the Chavetz Chaim, even though the Mechaber said ein ledaber, that you're not allowed to be mafsik with dibur, it's not what he means. He means you can't be mafsik, you can't be Mesiach Das from tefillah. Certainly for a davar shebekdusha, like the tchinois that we say, he picks on v'hurachum. Remember the Chavetz Chaim David Ashkenaz, so he picks on v'hurachum of Sheni v'Chamishi, but Nusach Sfard also all week with vidui bevadai mutar lahafsik. Then certainly you are allowed to be mafsik. Va'afilu b'soich nefilas hapayim. Even in middle of Tachanun, when you have your head down, even in middle of nefilas hapayim, gam kein mutar lanos amen yehesh me'raba v'chol davar shebekdusha. Certainly, you're allowed to be mafsik in middle of nefilas hapayim itself. For amen yehesh me'raba, there's no iser of being mafsik. Now, again, I'm going to turn to the Aruch HaShulchan for a moment, and then I'm going to take a look and go look at some of the Dirshu footnotes. But again, to give a little bit of a background here, because the Chavetz Chaim in the Mishnah Berurah is going to be a little bit difficult to really draw out. The Chavetz Chaim is going to walk a tightrope on exactly what constitutes a hefsek between Shemoneh Esrei and Tachanun and what does not. What we've seen so far is we have a Mechaber that says you're not allowed to speak. We have a Chavetz Chaim in the Mishnah Berurah that says, hold it. You're allowed to speak. Sicha ba'alma is not a problem. What is a problem? What's a problem is being Mesiach Das. Therefore, you want to say tchinois, you want to say vidui, you want to say v'hurachum on Sheni v'Chamishi. That is certainly not a hefsek. That's not being Mesiach Das from tefillah. So certainly you're allowed to do that. And certainly you're allowed to answer Amen Yehesh Me'raba. That's certainly not a problem. Now, there's a very nice paragraph here in Aruch HaShulchan. It's Aruch HaShulchan Siv Gimel. He says like this: because of Rabbeinu HaBeis Yosef, the Beis Yosef, the Mechaber on the Torah, he says, Ein ledaber ben tefillah l'nefilas hapayim ad kan l'shoynoi. You're not allowed to speak between Shemoneh Esrei and Tachanun. V'diktiku bazeh, and the Mefarshim, the Achronim, they take issue with this Mechaber. Daha b'Siman Nun Aleph, because if you look at the Mechaber back in Siman Nun Aleph, Siv Dalid, Mefurish Derak Arach Shemoneh Esrei also ledaber ayin sham. Back in Siman Nun Aleph, what the Mechaber told us was that you should be careful not to speak from Baruch Sha'amar until after Shemoneh Esrei. Now, that sounds like you're allowed to speak after Shemoneh Esrei. Why did the Mechaber say that? If the Mechaber is saying over here that you're not allowed to speak between Shemoneh Esrei and Tachanun, why didn't the Mechaber tell us that you're not allowed to speak from Baruch Sha'amar till after Tachanun? That's not what he says. He says you're not allowed to speak from Baruch She'amar till after Shemoneh Esrei. So mefurish the rak achar Shemoneh Esrei also ledaber ayin sham. It's only till after Shemoneh Esrei you're not allowed to speak. After Shemoneh Esrei you are allowed to speak, according to the Mechaber. So we seem to have a stira in the Mechaber over here. V'tirtzu, and the way they answer this stira is, they say, the dafka lahafsik v'lasok be'inyan acher oser. It's like the Mishnah Berurah said. It's not that you're not allowed to speak. You're not allowed to speak until after Shemoneh Esrei. There's a halacha of a hefsek. After that, you're allowed to speak. What you're not allowed to do is you're not allowed to be misiach das. Aval sicha ba'alma leslan ba, but sicha ba'alma is not a problem. And this is brought down from a Magen Avram. And that's where, if you look in the Sharit Siyan on the Mishnah Berurah that we just learned, he brings it from a Magen Avram. But, says Yarach HaShulchan, v'kama mea doichik uzeh. It's a little bit of a doichik teretz, because you're reading into the Mechaber words that the Mechaber doesn't say. The Mechaber says, ein ledaber. You're not allowed to speak. How does that become that sicha ba'alma is mutter and the only thing that's a problem is being mesiach das? How do we squeeze that into the words of the Mechaber? Amnam explains the Aruch HaShulchan. Amnam, however, kavanasai kenu. You want to know what the kavana of the Mechaber is? I'll tell you what the kavana of the Mechaber is. Deina kavana legeder iser. Legeder iser. The Mechaber is not coming to define and give us the permutations of an iser, like he is in Nun Aleph. In Siman Nun Aleph, the Mechaber is telling us what's aser. It's aser to speak between Baruch She'amar and Shemoneh Esrei. Till after Shemoneh Esrei, it's aser to speak. But that's not what he's saying over here in Siman Kuf Lamed Aleph when he says ein ledaber. Because over here, it's not shaykh to say that it's aser. Why? Explains the Aruch HaShulchan. Dein shaykh iser kevet yurak reshus. Because the truth is that nefilas apayim Tachanun is a reshus. It's not a chiyuv. And as a matter of fact, in the Aruch HaShulchan Siv Beis, he brings down from the Torah in the name of Rav Natra Noigayin, nefilas apayim reshusi v'loi chayva. Tachanun is not a chiyuv. Tachanun is a reshus. Ulechein, the Aruch HaShulchan says in Siv Beis, b'neikel mevatl noisay mipnei kama dvarim k'moishe yispar. And that's why we find that there are many times that we seemingly easily forego saying Tachanun, because it's a reshus, not a chiyuv. Then the Aruch HaShulchan goes on to say, Achshav shekol Yisrael nagu bazeh. Now that it became a minig, the ganz Klal Yisrael says Tachanun shavinu alayu kechayva. We made it a shtickle a chiyuv im ma'at ve'im harbe. So says the Aruch HaShulchan over here. Therefore, when the Mechaber says over here ein ledaber, he doesn't mean mitam iser. Back at Siman Nun Aleph, when he said you're not allowed to be mafsik between Baruch She'amar and Shemoneh Esrei, that's mitam iser. There's an iser, you're not allowed to be mafsik. Over here, when he says ein ledaber, he means you shouldn't speak, but he doesn't mean mitam iser. He says like this: Amnam Rabbeinu Abeis Yosef Halach Lishitasai Besifrei Agadol Shekasa B'Shem Arashba. The Beis Yosef is going according to his own opinion, and he quotes this, and he gets it in the name of the Rashba. You see, there's a story in the Gemara in Bam Metzia. The Gemara in Bam Metzia tells us that there was a Maisa that happened between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Eliezer had tainus on Rabbi Gamliel. Well, that was a whole story with a psak, la halacha, they disagreed with each other, and Rabbi Eliezer had tainus on Rabbi Gamliel. Now, Rabbi Eliezer was married to Rabbi Gamliel's sister. Rabbi Eliezer's wife knew that the fact that Rabbi Eliezer had tainus on Rabbi Gamliel could end badly for Rabbi Gamliel. And she knew, especially if Rabbi Eliezer is going to say Tachanun. If Rabbi Eliezer is going to be mispal by nefilas apayim, and he might have in mind something against Rabbi Gamliel, not going to end well for Rabbi Gamliel. So what did she do? It says, Lo yhoisa manichasei lipel. She did not allow him to say nefilas apayim. Okay, so what did she do? She got into a conversation with him when she made sure that every day when it was time for nefilas apayim, she got into a conversation with her husband. And then he didn't go ahead and say Tachanun anymore. Now, now wait a second. Says the Talmidei Rashba, say, hold it. What do you see from there? You see from there that the fact that Rebbe Eliezer's wife got into a conversation with Rebbe Eliezer between Shemoneh Esrei and the Nefilas HaPayim made so that Rebbe Eliezer shouldn't say Tachanun. Now wait a second. Why not? Why couldn't he say Tachanun 5 minutes later? And was he mamish Mesiach Das? No, he spoke. So therefore, what the Beis Yosef took from there is that the connection between Nefilas HaPayim and Shemoneh Esrei is such that the efficacy of Nefilas HaPayim, the efficacy of Tachanun is if it follows on the heels of our Tfilas Shemoneh Esrei. But if there's any hefsek between our Tfilas Shemoneh Esrei and Tachanun, it takes away the effectiveness of Tachanun. Now we seemingly don't take it to that degree, and the Chavetz Chaim is telling us it doesn't mean b'tzicha b'alma. It doesn't mean if you just spoke. It means if you are Mesiach Das. Okay, now the Mishnah Berurah said over here, there's a couple of things that come out from the Dirshu footnotes that are very, very kedai to mention, because these are shilas that come up very, very often. So first of all, if you take a look at Dirshu footnote number 3, a common shaila that comes up is what happens between people who daven Sfard and people who daven Ashkenaz on Monday and Thursday, right? So if you daven Sfard, so you're used to saying on Monday and Thursday, what you would do is you would say Vidui, you would say Shlosh Esrei Midos, then you would do Nefilas HaPayim with Rachav V'Chanun, then you would say V'hu Racham. Ashkenaz, if you find yourself davening in an Ashkenaz shul, they go straight into V'hu Racham, and they do Nefilas HaPayim near the end of V'hu Racham. So what should somebody who davens Ashkenaz do if he's by people who daven Sfard? What should people who daven Sfard do if they find themselves by people who daven Ashkenaz? So if you take a look at Dirshu footnote number 3, there's a short little paragraph, V'yesh Noihagim, then comes the next paragraph, V'im Nimtza. So he says like this, V'im Nimtza bebeis HaKnesses, if you find yourself in a shul, Shenagu loimer by Tachanun koidem v'hu racham, if you daven Ashkenaz, and you find yourself in a shul that daven Sfard, where they do Nefilas HaPayim before v'hu racham, umin hagayenu kain, and your minig is not that way. Your minig is like Ashkenaz. Or if you daven Sfard and you're used to saying Nefilas HaPayim right away, and now you find yourself davening in an Ashkenaz shul where they say Nefilas HaPayim near the end of v'hu racham, what should you do? So he brings down two opinions. First, and this is the way of the Dirshu, first they bring down the Paiskei Eretz Yisrael. Das Agoid Rav Shlomo Zalman Arbach Zatzal, Vagoid Rabbi Yosef Shalom Al Yasher Zatzal. Shekevan Shahaminhagim Chaluki B'Chamakim. Since nowadays it's very well known that there are these different established minhagim in different places, and B'Kach B'Shem Loisis Goidedu. There's no inyan of Loisis Goidedu. Normally we don't like that in one shul, in one sibur, there should be people doing like this and people doing like that. That's Loisis Goidedu. It makes Klal Yisrael look like a disconnected, discombobulated group of people. Some do like this, some do like that. But the Paiskei Eretz Yisrael said, over here it's very well known that there's a minig nusach Sfard like this, there's a minig nusach Ashkenaz like that. It's accepted, it's understood, it's not a problem of Loisis Goidedu. But then if you skip a few lines, you skip the brackets over here, brings down from the Rishiva Zatzal, from Rav Moshe Zek Tzaddik Kodesh L'Vracha, Me'idach, B'shal Setchuvas Igris Moshe, U'B'shal Setchuvas Oz Nidbaru, Kasru she'ein l'shanois b'minik hamakayim. I know that the Rishiva Zatzal was very big on this. The Rishiva Zatzal the Rishiva Zatzal very, very often held that a person should do like the tzibur that he's with. A person should not make himself different than the tzibur. So you daven Ashkenaz, and now you're in Nusach Sfard shul, doing the Nefilas HaPayim when they do, and then and you'll say V'hu Racham first, and then you'll do the Nefilas HaPayim when they do near the end. You daven Ashkenaz and you're in a Sfard shul, do Nefilas HaPayim first, and then say V'hu Racham. Next, Dirshu footnote number 4. This is also something. Well, did we do this yet? Yeah, we did. The Mishnah Berurah said that certainly you're allowed to be mafsik. The language of the Mishnah Berurah was kolshkein de ledvar kedusha kegoin mashem afsike betchinois kegoin v'urachom bevadai mutter lahafsik. The language of the Chavetz Chaim was that it's mutter to be mafsik in the filos hapayim for dvarim shebekdusha. Dirshu footnote number 4, va'af shekasav v'Mishnah Berurah mutter, even though the Mishnah Berurah wrote this with the lashon of mutter, which means that it's permissible to be mafsik, das hagoyin Reb Chaim Kanievsky shekavanasai shechayiv lanois. The way the Dirshu footnote writes it, it sounds like this was the opinion of Reb Chaim Kanievsky, as if there are others who disagree with Reb Chaim Kanievsky. I don't know if there's anybody who differs, who argues on Reb Chaim Kanievsky, as much as Reb Chaim Kanievsky made sure to point it out. I don't think there's anybody who holds that it's usher to be mafsik in the filos hapayim for a men yesh be'rabba. Reb Chaim Kanievsky just pointed out, if you look at the Mishnah Berurah says mutter, you might have a havamina, oh, it's mutter, but maybe it's better not to. No, you're chayiv. You have to be mafsik in the filos hapayim for a men yesh be'rabba or other dvarim shebekdusha. Now, the next paragraph here, Dirshu footnote number 4, this is something that has come up a lot. Many people have asked me this question. Let's say the chazan gets up to chatzi kaddish after tachanun while you are still saying tachanun. So you're running late, you finished your Shemoneh Esrei late, you started saying tachanun when the tzibur was almost finished tachanun. Now you're in the middle of the filos hapayim, you've got your head down, and the chazan starts saying chatzi kaddish after tachanun, and you want to answer amen, yehesh me'rabba, but you don't know what to do because you're sitting there with your head down. Are you supposed to stand up? What are you supposed to do? Says the footnote here, Vim hiskal hashatz lemekadish alakar hataknun ba'oid hamispal neufel apayim das hagoyin Reb Chaim Kanievsky she'ein oid tzarich lamoid. You don't have to stand up. Elayane kaddish b'yeshiva. You should answer to the kaddish while you are still sitting down. Okay. So, where are we so far? So where we are so far, just to very quickly recap. The Mechaber said you're not allowed to speak between Shemoneh Esrei and Nefilas Hapayim. The Chavetz Chaim tempers it, and the Chavetz Chaim says take it easy. Sicha ba'alma, just speaking between Shemoneh Esrei and Nefilas Hapayim is not a problem. What's a problem? A problem is if you are mafsik v'oisik b'dvarim acherim legamri. If you got busy with other things, so that's Yomasiach Das. Then, like we saw in the Aruch HaShulchan, the efficacy of tachanun is gone, because tachanun is supposed to come on the heels of Shemoneh Esrei. It's a continuation of davening. If you were Masiach Das from davening, you lost that connection, and now tachanun is not going to be effective anymore. And that's why the wife of Rebbe Eliezer, sister of Rabbi Gamliel, made sure to distract her husband, Rebbe Eliezer, from davening, so that his tachanun shouldn't be effective anymore, and Rabbi Gamliel would not come to harm. And it would seem from the Gemara in Bava Metzia that once she distracted him, he didn't say tachanun anymore. That was it. He didn't say tachanun. Now let's go to Mishnah Berurah's cut and base. Bein tefillah, right? So you're not supposed to be. Now this is a tricky Mishnah Berurah, which I don't know exactly what to do with. I spoke to a paisik this morning, a chashav a paisik, and he told me it's very hard to discern from the Chavetz Chaim exactly what he means. Says the Chavetz Chaim, mihu im avar v'diber. Let's say you transgressed this halacha and you spoke. Pshita detzarch lipal al panav. He brings down from the Sefer Derech HaChaim, that if you did speak between Shemoneh Esrei and the Nefilas Hapayim, it's pshita that you still have to say tachanun. Now, what does the Chavetz Chaim mean? To say that the Chavetz Chaim means literally what he wrote, it's very hard to say that way. Why? Because again, the Mechaber said you're not allowed to be medaber, you're not allowed to speak. The Chavetz Chaim jumped up right away in Ois Katan Aleph and said, no. It doesn't mean that you're not allowed to speak. You are allowed to speak. What aren't you allowed to do? You're not allowed to be Masiach Das. You're not allowed to get involved in other things. Now, says the Chavetz Chaim in Ois Cotton Bays, if you spoke, obviously you still have to say Nefilas Apayim. Well, according to what the Chavetz Chaim told me in Sif Aleph, in Ois Cotton Aleph, we already know that speaking alone is not a hefsek. So why do you have to tell me that if you spoke, you still have to say Tachanun? You just told me in Mishnah Berurah Ois Cotton Aleph, yeah, the Mechaber says you're not allowed to speak. It doesn't really mean you're not allowed to speak. You are allowed to speak. So if you're allowed to speak, of course if you spoke, you still have to say Tachanun. So it's hard to say that that's what the Chavetz Chaim meant. So what did the Chavetz Chaim mean? Well, what the Chavetz Chaim said does constitute a hefsek is if you are Mesiach Das. If you are Mesiach Das, that constitutes a hefsek. So does the Mishnah Berurah mean over here, mihu, even if you were Mesiach Das, and even if you were mafsik and oisik bidvarim acherim, still you're mechuyev to say Tachanun? Is that what he means? That's a stretch. Especially, we're going to see later, the Shaila comes up, what happens if somebody's davening in a base oval? In a base oval, they don't say Tachanun. So let's say somebody went, you daven Chachmas in a base oval, and now he leaves the base oval, he wants to go home, he wants to say Tachanun. The Mishnah Berurah is going to paskin, you don't say Tachanun. That's it. You missed your opportunity. Tachanun is after Shemoneh Esrei. Now you already finished the rest of davening. That's it. It's gone. You're not going to say Tachanun anymore. So what's the line? What's the geder? What makes a hefsek that you no longer say Tachanun? What makes a hefsek that you don't say Tachanun? From the Aruch HaShulchan, so far what I've seen in the Aruch HaShulchan, I didn't see the Aruch HaShulchan tackle the Shaila head on. I didn't finish the whole Siman. I didn't see yet in Aruch HaShulchan where the Aruch HaShulchan should say, if you were mafsik, if you were Mesiach Das, what's the halacha? But from the Aruch HaShulchan that I read to you, the Aruch HaShulchan said very clearly, once you Mesiach Das, that's it. There's no efficacy left to Tachanun. So why would you say it? From the Chavetz Chaim himself in Ois Cotton Aleph, it sounds like the dafka kishamafsik va'oisik b'dvar b'achem legamri. And he's coming off the Magen Avram. The Magen Avram seems to be saying also that then Tachanun is not efficacious anymore. So what does he mean here in Ois Cotton Bays im avar v'diber pshita desarch lipal al panav? I'm not yet 100% sure what he means. Again, I spoke to a chashav of Pesach this morning and I put him on the spot. I said, what are you going to do? Somebody asks you the Shaila halacha l'maisa. Somebody will ask you the Shaila halacha l'maisa. He davened Shemoneh Esrei. He was in the middle of Chazaras Hashatz. Maybe an emergency came up. He got an emergency phone call. He went out. He was oisik bidvarim acherim. He spent 20 minutes on the phone dealing with a work emergency or a family emergency. Now he comes back in. Does he say Tachanun or not? So he told me he would paskin no. You don't say Tachanun because you are mafsik, you are mamish Mesiach Das from Tefillah. You wouldn't say Tachanun anymore. So I asked him, I said, what do you do with this Mishnah Berurah? He said, yeah, the Mishnah Berurah is difficult to figure out exactly what he means. He felt that the Mishnah Berurah chose his words. I'm looking at the Chavetz Chaim. I have a picture of the Chavetz Chaim on my wall here opposite me. You can't see it. It's on the other side of the camera. The Chavetz Chaim was so careful choosing his words. The Chavetz Chaim could have written, Miu im hisiach das, pshita detzarch lipa al panav. He didn't say that. He said, Miu im avar v'diber. If you spoke. Now again, I asked you the kasha. If the Chavetz Chaim in Ois Cotton Aleph already told me that speaking is not a problem, why did he have to tell me this? It sounds like this Pesach told me maybe the Mishnah Berurah is kind of leaving it up to the judgment of a Pesach. Sicha ba'alma, I told you in Ois Cotton Aleph, is sicha not a hefsek. But then there's in his words here in Beis, im avar v'diber. He was over. He went against the halacha that we just said. Now, what does it mean he went against the halacha that we just said? Well, the halacha that we just said is you're not allowed to be mafsik v'oisik b'dvarim acherim. Well, what if he was mafsik v'oisik b'dvarim acherim, but it wasn't azar hefsek. It wasn't a 20-minute mamish b'siach hadas. It was a conversation. But it wasn't just sicha ba'alma. It wasn't, oh, good morning. You see, sicha ba'alma is just simple speech. Sicha ba'alma is that I forgot this halacha, and it's the chazan just finished chazar hashatz. We're up to Tachanun. My friend walked in, sat next to me, and I looked at him and said, oh, good morning. And now I go to say Tachanun. That's sicha ba'alma. Sicha ba'alma, the Chavetz Chaim said, Sicha not a problem. Sicha ba'alma is not a problem. It's not like we saw in Aruch HaShulchan. It's not a din in hefsek. So that's not a problem. In ois cotton bays, the Chavetz Chaim is im oiver v'diber. If he was oiver because his diber wasn't just good morning. Maybe his diber was more, oh, Yankel, oh, it's good to see you. You know, I just remembered I wanted to call you yesterday. I wanted to ask you, I need a car, and you told me that Yenim was selling a car. Oh, you know what? We'll talk about it after davening. So he was over. He was diber, and it wasn't sicha ba'alma. It was more of a substantive conversation. But it took 15 seconds. Was he really Mesiach Das from Tefillah with that 15-second thing, and he said, I'll talk to you after davening? So this is maybe where the Chavetz Chaim is leaving it as a judgment call to the Paisik. You have to look at the Diber, and you have to see, is it a Diber of Hesach HaDas? Is it not a Diber of Hesach HaDas? What was this Diber? That's the way I'm seeing it over here. Okay. Continues the Chavetz Chaim here in Ois Cotton Beis. Mutter lehispalel b'makam echad. You're allowed to daven in one place, v'lipal b'makam acher, and then to go say Tachanun b'makam acher, v'ach shelo yafsik be'emtza. As long as you're not mafsik in between. I had in mind to just take a look at the source of that in the... that's all the Magen Avraham says. The Magen Avraham says, Ayin Beis Yosef, Mutter lehispal b'makam echad, you're allowed to daven in one place, v'lipal b'makam acher, and to say Tachanun somewhere else. In other words, you don't have to mamish stand on your spot. To what extent does this go? It sounds like as long as you're not Mesiach Das. Again, as long as you're not mafsik. And we're saying that to be mafsik means to be Mesiach Das. As long as you're not Mesiach Das, you could go and you could still say Tachanun. Would you have imagined that these halachos would be so complex? Okay. Now let's get into the next set of complexities over here with Tachanun. Continues the Mechaber. We're in the first line. We're 37 minutes into the shir, and we're on the first line here of Sif Aleph. Continues the Mechaber. Kishen noifal al panav. When you do fall down on your face for Tachanun, Nahagu lahatois al tzad smoil. The minig is to fall down on your left. Now, if you fall down on your left, this is my left hand. The camera does mirror image, I think. This is my left hand. If you fall down on your left, then your head turns to the right. So, the Mechaber says over here, Kishenayfal al panam nahagu lahatois al tzad smoil. You should fall on your left. Right away, Haggah, it comes along the Ramah. The Ramah says, some say you should fall down on the right. And if you fall down on the right, you're looking to the left. Okay, so we have over here two different opinions of what to do. Says the Ramah, the ikar is lahatois b'shachris kisheyesh lo tefillin b'smoilai. By Shachris, when you have tefillin on your left arm, so then you should fall outside Yamin, then you should fall on your right hand, looking to the left, Mishum covered tefillin, because it's not ba'kovedik that you should put your head down and rest your head on the tefillin. Uba arvis, which literally means by Ma'ariv, but the Mishnah Berurah is going to say, understand, it means by mincha. It means towards evening, which is mincha, when you're not wearing tefillin. Tefillin, or even by Shachris, if you're not wearing tefillin, then tefillin when you don't have tefillin on your left hand, yatal smailai, then you should put your head down on the left. Okay, recap. What do we have over here? We have the Mechaber says that when you do Nefilas Hapayim, you should put your head down on the left arm. The Ramah says, some say, you should put your head down on the right arm. Says the Ramah, what's the Iker? The Iker is that we walk a tightrope and we try to be Pesach al Shtei Seifim. We try to dance of halachos, and we try to be Mekayim both. How are we Mekayim both? By Shachris, there's a compelling reason not to put your head down on your left arm, because you have tefillin on your left arm and it's not pakavedik. By Mincha, or whenever you're not wearing tefillin, then you have no problem. So by Shachris, when you're wearing tefillin, put your head down on the left. I'm sorry. By Shachris, when you're wearing tefillin, put your head down on the right. So you're Mekayim the Shitas that say put your head down on the right. By Mincha, or any other time that you're not wearing tefillin, put your head down on the left, and you'll be Mekayim the Shita of putting your head down on the left. What's at play over here? Why do you have to put your head down at all? Why are we putting our head down? And well, that we saw already. We're putting our head down to have the format of davening with our head down. So fine. That's why we're putting our head down. What's behind whether you should put it on the right, whether you should put it on the left? Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. It says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Gimel, Kishen Neifel Al Panav, when you put your head down. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Hine, Nefilas Hapayim Shenagu Baba Yamim Harishainim. In the early days, once upon a time when they did Nefilas Hapayim, Haya B'derech Kida. It was mamish in the format of falling down on the floor. Dahainu Lipail Al Panav, to fall down flat on your face, Arza, to the ground, but Vishaloi B'pishut Yadayim V'raglayim, but not with your hands and legs outstretched. That's the way they did it then. I think that's what we usually call hishtachava, going down on the ground with your head down to the floor. V'akshav lo'inagu lipal al pnei mamish. Nowadays we're not knowing to do that. Ela b'hatoyas haroish. We just put our head down, and this is very important, v'kisoy haponim, and covering up our faces bilvad. So nowadays, says the Chavetz Chaim, we don't do this hishtachava. We don't get down on the ground and put our faces down to the ground like we do in Yom Kippur. Nowadays, the ikar is to put your head down and cover your face. V'noyagim lachasais haponim babeged. And we're supposed to cover our face with a beged, meaning you don't take your bare arm and cover your face. You have to have a beged. You have to have the sleeve of your jacket or something, or your talus covering your face. Why? Because your face and your arm are part of the same body. It's guf echad. And the Magen Avraham says that's covering your eyes and your face with part of your body does not constitute covering yourself. Because you have to cover yourself with something else, with something external to you. Your arm is not external to you. So you have to use a beged to cover yourself. Now, Ois Katan Daled. The Mechaber said that the minig is you should put your head down outside smoil. You should put your head down on your left arm. Why? Says the Chavetz Chaim, Lefi shematzinu, because we find Kisha Adam Mispalel, that when a person davens, Shechina miyaminoi. The Shechina, the divine presence, is located to his right. Shenemar, because David HaMelech says in Tefillin, in Tehillim, Hashem tzilcha al yad yaminecha. Hashem will shadow you on your right hand. So the Shechina, when you daven, is to your right. V'nimtza, and it comes out, Kishehumuta al smoiloi, when you put your head down on your left arm, panav klape shchina, right? This is my left hand. I put my head down on my left hand, my face is turned to the right. So I'm turning towards the shchina. Vim hayamuta al yad yaminoi, if you would put your head down on the right, then you would be facing the left. Hayalahepech. V'layitachel le'eved li'yisachayre panav klape adoinov. What are you doing? You're davening to your master, but you're facing away from your master? When you daven to your master, you have to face to your master. So says the Chavetz Chaim, when the Mechaber says that by Tachanun you should put your head down on the left arm, why is that? Because the Shechina is to your right. Put your head down on your left arm and face right. Along came the Ramah, and the Ramah said, Yesh Oyrim, the opposite. There are those that say that you should put your head down on the right and you should face towards the left. Why? Says the Chavetz Chaim is Cotton Hay outside Yamin. Ki hashchina neged ha'adam. Because there are those that say that the shchina is opposite a person. The nimtza that comes out when somebody is standing opposite you, even though we're anthropomorphizing the Rebbeinu Shalom, the Rebbeinu Shalom ain't like guf, right? But the Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't have a body, but we're using words that we can understand. The nimtza smoil hashchina keneged yaminai. So if the shchina kaviyachol is, so to speak, facing you, right? So then the Rebbeinu Shalom's left is on your right. Ukishuhumuta al yaminoi. So then when you put your head down on your right arm, v'hashchina kenegdoi, and the shchina is opposite you, yechavein, it comes out, smoiloi tachas leroishi. I'm putting my head down on my right arm. Now my right arm is keneged the Rebbeinu Shalom's left side. So smoiloi, the Rebbeinu Shalom's left, is tachas leroishi, under my head. I'm putting my head down on my right side, which is the Rebbeinu Shalom's left side. V'yaminai, and the Rebbeinu Shalom's right side, techabekeni, will embrace me. Okay, now obviously this is all way past my pay grade, but we have over here, the Mechaber says, put your head down on the left. The Chavetz Chaim said, why? Because if you put your head down on the left, you're facing the Shechina, which is on your right. The Ramah brought down a Yesh Omrim, put down your head on the right and face the left. Why? Put your head down on the right, because that's opposite the Rebbeinu Shalom's left, and you're Bekayim Smoiloi Tachas Roishi, and you're facing right via Minoi Techabikeni. Okay, here we have the two opinions. Ois Kat Vav, Veho Iker, the Ramah said, what's the Iker? What should you do? You should be Mekayim both. How are you Mekayim both? Well, by Shachris, when you're wearing tefillin, have covered for your tefillin and put your head down on your right arm. By Mincha and any other time that you're not wearing tefillin, you don't have to worry about the cover of the tefillin, then put your head down on the left. Viho Iker. V'chein das hataz u'magen Avram, says the Mishnah Berurah, this is the opinion of the Taz and the Magen Avram, she'ein l'shanis b'minig zeh, you shouldn't change this minig, v'chein no'agu ha'olam, and this is the minig of the Welt. Va'afilu lahagra, and even according to the Gra, the Gra seems to say that the Iker is the minig of the Mechaber, that you should always put your head down on the left, even if you're wearing tefillin. Nevertheless, in Mispal bebeis hamedrash, if you're davening in shul, v'ha'olam noegin k'haRamah, and the Welt fertzach like the Ramah, you shouldn't do different. Ushliach tzibur ha'omed miyamin ha'aron, the Shliach Tzibur, if he's standing to the right of the Aron, Tov Shigat the Rosh Ma'at Klape Aron, he should turn his head a little bit to the Aron. Now, the Ramah, when he was speaking about Mincha, he used the word Uba'arvis, which normally means by Ma'ariv. Says the Mishnah Berurah, what the Ramah wants to say is Litzad Arvis, when we are approaching Ma'ariv. Tahainu b'mincha, she'ein on a noigin lo niech tefillin, when we don't wear tefillin. Umisha min niech tefillin gam sham. If somebody is wearing tefillin by mincha, yipal al yamino, you should put his head down on the right arm. V'ayin b'chai adam shemitzadid oz yuchal lismach al das hagra v'lipal al smailoi. The Chai Adam says somebody who's wearing tefillin by mincha, he could fertzach like the gra, and even though it's mincha time, he could put his, he could fertzach like the gra, and even though he's wearing tefillin, he could put his head down on the left arm on the tefillin. Okay, so what have we seen over here? We have this machlokes, two opinions, which arm you should put your head down on, and now we see what's behind it. The Rishiv Zatzal was noyig, Rav Moshe was noyig, not like this, even though Rav Moshe writes that this is the thrust of what the Ramah wanted. He says the Ramah wanted that we should be Mekayim both minhagim. What the Rishiv Zatzal did was, he didn't do this, he didn't do this, he did this. He put both arms. When he was wearing tefillin, he put the right arm on top for the cover of the tefillin, and he went like this, and he put his head down like that, and that's the way he said Tachanun. And it seems that he didn't look to the right or to the left. He put his arms like this and put his head down. And by Mincha, when he wasn't wearing tefillin, he put the left arm on top and he put his head straight down. Now, I wanted to do more over here, There's a bir halacha that I'd like to go through, and there's a Dirshu footnote I'd like to go through. There's no more time today. Tomorrow there's a lot of Mishnah Berurah, but we'll see what we can get to. Who would have imagined that the halachos of Tachanun are so complex? I hope this is all clear. I'm trying to push out a lot of information in the time that we have. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. Discussing limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shem should say Yeshua's refuas parnas and sheduchim to all those in need, and we should be zeicher to see the bias goyel tzedek b'beher of Yameinu. Amen. Be well.